Mero is a mother, a partner, and an active citizen. She has over 23 years of professional experience in the realms of gender, development, and humanitarian affairs across sub-Saharan Africa. She's a freelance consultant and renowned for her public advocacy under the hashtag SwitchOffKPLC and Humanity Kenya. Her work has a continuous focus on good governance and anti-corruption. So we'll start today's discourse with a discussion of a letter from a group called the Women of Kenya, which was sent to the President of the Law Society of Kenya and various government agencies last week regarding what they describe as the selective application of the law and rules and directions on COVID-19, with particular reference to the latitude being taken by Kenyan leadership on the matter. From disobeying confinement measures, social distancing rules, and number of gathering limits, to not wearing protective masks. So before we start, let's watch a clip of the video that is the genesis of the discussion and which sparked the complaint and the call to action by the Law Society of Kenya. So here goes the video.
I think this is the first time we have realized almost every constituency in West Kenya represented and 4 governors, right away from Busia, Bungoma, Kakamega, and Vihiga, and 5 senators. This is wonderful. And on behalf of my family, on behalf of the workers that I do represent locally and internationally, I want to thank them to have accepted our invitation, and particularly the organizers under the able chairmanship of Wycliffe Oparanya, CS Wamadwa, and Wangwe, and now they have asked Senator Malala to read the outcome of this very important meeting. And for those who have been doubting, because I've been telling you time and again that Western Kenya leaders are united, and people could not believe it. Sometimes you reduce it to the Anui affair. Here we have Tesla, we have our brothers from Mount Elgon, we have Sabot, we have everybody who stays or who lives in Western Kenya. And we have Nairobian leaders who originally, their roots are in Western Kenya, represented by, we have Sister Senator Sakaja, we have Aladwa, Member of Parliament from Makadara.
So in addition to that video, I'm sure many of you saw the video of our Kenyan leaders also dancing and enjoying a party after their convention. And they were not complying with many of the COVID directions and restriction measures. So with this, Daisy, please can you explain to us who are the Women of Kenya, and can you speak to us a little bit on your complaint?
Thank you so much, Valentine, and thank you for this opportunity. So the Women of Kenya are just that. They are the Women of Kenya. You know, we were completely appalled to see the way the leaders were dancing. And on the other hand, we had the state using a very heavy hand on ordinary citizens. We have seen the police beat to death citizens for not wearing masks. We have seen people being carted off to quarantine by force for breaking, confinement well, not the confinement rules, the numbers, the gathering numbers, even being accused when they're not. We know that there are quite a few people who've died from police brutality, being killed by the police in the name of enforcing the COVID laws. And the Cabinet Secretary for Health has constantly been coming on the media berating Kenyans, accusing them of not taking seriously the COVID-19 pandemic and the seriousness of it. And then we see the leaders behaving in such a casual and callous manner without a thought, one, of the seriousness of the situation, because in fact, many people have been asking, so does COVID really exist? If our leaders can gather together, they break the shutdown, the confinement rules, because Atwoli's residence is outside of the metropolitan area. And while some of these leaders have been classified as essential services, but it was only for the purposes of legislating and attending to their work as far as it relates to representation of the people, but not to go cavorting and dancing and drinking and doing their politics, which is not an essential service. So we were very upset about it. But you see, as Kenyans, we're also tired of constantly lamenting, because we were on a social media group and everybody was quite appalled. And we raised the issue also about some of the female members of parliament and MCAs that we saw there. And we were like, gosh, even our fellow women, you know, when we talk about the plight of women, women have been so hard hit by the measures, the state measures of the COVID pandemic. Remember, people are starving. People have lost jobs. People have lost their homes. People are struggling. So our leaders should at least empathize with the citizens. So we said, no, it's not enough that we just lament. And so we decided to come together as women of Kenya. One, because women are despised. Women are seen as not being able to move themselves to action. They must be moved to action. When we see women moved to action, it's always for some political faction, you know, or political leader. But we said we can move ourselves to action as women to demand that the state explain to us what this is all about. Do you have different laws for a different set of people? Does the application of the law apply only for ordinary citizens? And do we have a cadre of people who are above the law? The CS of Health has not said anything other than to say that, you know, they cannot control politicians. But politicians are servants of the people. They're not there for themselves. They're supposed to be there for us, the people, the tax-paying Kenyan. And the CS Health, CS Interior, because this is also a security issue, right? We're told COVID is also a security issue. The police are helping in, you know, implementing the measures. So they must explain to us as individuals, because they take an oath of office to uphold the rule of law and to apply the law impartially. But this is not what is happening. Now we realize that we didn't have the power to enforce it ourselves. And so that is why we approached the president of the Law Society of Kenya. Can you take action for us as citizens of Kenya, women citizens of Kenya, against the holders of these public offices who are not obeying the Constitution, applying the law partially, and essentially being derelict in their duties, showing that some people are above the law? Because I think that they have a case to answer to tell us whether they work for the people of Kenya or they work for a certain group of people of Kenya. Because either the police work for all Kenyans, and we should be seeing these leaders carted off to quarantine centers by force at their own cost. Remember what happened to the deputy governor of Kilifi. Remember, he was forced into quarantine, and from there, he was taken to court. This is what should happen to these guys. We want them tested for COVID. If they are found positive, they'll be isolated at their own cost, and they should be charged in a court of law for breaking the law and for endangering the lives of other people. So this is essentially what it is, and it is the women of Kenya. Some of them were afraid to put their names to it because of how brutal the state can be. You know, people have been terrorized into silence, but we said we are not going to be terrorized.
Thank you, Daisy. The Law Society has heard your call to action. In your letter, you specify a phrase, you say different laws for different people. outside of COVID, can you just expand a little bit more on what that looks like to you? Different laws for different people in Kenya.
I think it's even self-evident. Aside from the COVID rules, let's look at the traffic laws. Okay, we see, in fact, driving a GK car or being in government is a license to break traffic rules. We all know that because of poor planning, we have a terrible situation of traffic on the road. However, you see the police actually waving on government vehicles and people driven in these tinted cars with chase cars, who, by the way, I think the police have continually said, and this is from the time of the late Nkaiseri, when he said that they should not have chase cars. They've even listed the cadre of people, the cabinet secretaries and the executive members of the executive who have right of way. But this doesn't apply. We've seen active citizens, people like Boniface Mwangi, who refuse to move for them. And he's like, no. But how many people do that? Everybody, sheepishly moves away while these people break the law and are waved on by the police. That is an example of how the law is applied selectively. When it comes to things like taxation, you explain to me why in a merger where the president's family's bank is actually allowed not to pay taxes when everybody else is paying taxes, and at a time when the country badly needs taxes because of the financial mismanagement, but they go ahead to pass, the Treasury actually gives them a pass and allows them to get away with not paying taxes. This is selective application of the law. And the worst thing, it's not for people who even need it, So, I mean, and there's several other examples, but I think it is tiring, and there's a frustration among the people. There's huge frustration. And Cherotich will say so much more, but we have seen selective application of the law time and time again. We've seen when people who are not politically correct seek to gather together, there's a heavy-handedness from the state. But when the politically correct people are gathering, they are ushered in and they are given protection by the state. Whereas the police is not supposed to act in a partial manner. They're supposed to be non-partisan and non-partial. They're supposed to provide security to everybody. So we're going back to those days when this used to happen.
Thank you, Daisy. Gerald, please, can you kindly share your views as a non-lawyer? What is your perspective on selective application of the law in Kenya?
Thanks very much, Valentine, and also thanks to the LSK for giving us this opportunity as non-lawyers to come on board and share our views. Just to echo a little bit what Daisy talked about, I'm very happy that we are also pushing as the women of Kenya for personal liability when it comes to the CS, Interior, CS Health, and IG Police, because if they are the ones who are supposed to enforce the laws that are in place and they don't follow through, yes, I think the legislators who attended that party should also face the full extent of the law, but we want to hold the duty bearers responsible. Mm-hmm. So I think that's something we need to underscore. And if you come to the case, for example, of Miguna, who should be held personally liable for the destruction of his passport and identity documents
and property,
and the complete property and the complete ignoring of court orders. I mean, Miguna is a member of Law Society of Kenya and has been treated in an abysmal manner. If you look at disobedience of court orders, if you look at the law being applied differently, let's come to February 26th, when 239 passengers landed on the Southern China Airlines. A court order was issued because this was around the time that COVID was becoming a reality for us. And a court order was issued saying that we had to produce, that Ministry of Health and various actors, Foreign Affairs, had to immediately produce these 239 individuals and send them to quarantine in a designated government or official location. To date, we do not know who the 239 passengers were. Yet you find a couple of joggers on the street or some young people somewhere in Nakuru, they are arrested and thrown into forced quarantine. So when you look at the law applying, it even gets to the point that it jeopardizes our safety. So if 239 passengers landed, who protected them and why? And who should be held personally liable? I'm amazed that that cabinet secretaries responsible for these for their dockets and responsible for producing the 239 passengers are still sitting pretty in office. There's such an air of impunity. It is a stench of impunity, where the law is regularly, rule of law is regularly undermined by those who are entrusted with the responsibility to uphold it. Let's look at the evictions and demolitions in Kariobangi. There was a court order as early as February saying that, yes, even if this land does not belong to the squatters on that land, which is also disputed because there's some interesting stories behind how they were allocated that land, you are not to demolish and evict them before the matter is fully heard. What has happened? In May, they were evicted. 5,000 people, Kariobangi, followed by Ruai. What is this? But if somebody somewhere in Runda was to be evicted from their house because there's a dispute, you will not find bulldozers in the middle of the night coming to demolish that house. So it's a class thing, it's an impunity thing, and it's something that is going to haunt us until we find a few good women and men. And why I'm very proud and happy to be a part of the Women of Kenya network is because every single place in Kenya today where you see the law being violated, women bear the brunt. As you mentioned, I have focused a lot on switch off KPLC and issues of energy justice. Who bears the brunt of overpriced electricity in Kenya today, of overpriced fuel? Who continuously has to make a choice between buying food or buying tokens, buying medicine or paying a fraudulent electricity bill? And even we go back to the genesis of the switch off KPLC campaign back in January 2018, where we were looking at the issue of KPLC with the blessings of Ministry of Energy, trying to recover 10 billion shillings, of which they had already recovered about 2 billion. There was a court order demanding and instructing that KPLC does not further collect the balance of 8 billion shillings from consumers. That was the last we heard of it. Today, those books are balanced. That money was collected. We experience it monthly, weekly, daily, depending on whether you're postpaid or prepaid electricity consumer. It does not seem to matter what the court says, but there's a group of people that operate with complete impunity. And ultimately, for me, it links back to issues of corruption and governance, crony capitalism. Who is to benefit from the law being violated? This is in the energy sector, as I have talked about from time for quite a while now. Who benefits most when the law is broken? And it is certainly not Wanjiku. It is those who are in the generation, transmission, distribution, and sale of electricity. Those who are part of the oil import cartels. This is why no matter how low globally the oil prices are today, we will never experience a commensurate reduction at our pumps. So it becomes an infusion of systems that permeate the lives and livelihoods of Kenyans. And that's why when we start off by saying there are legislators who violated COVID regulations, as soon as you pull the thread, you unravel it. And you go back and you start talking about impunity and disobedience of court orders and the cartels that lurk in the background. And ultimately, for me, sadly, the compromise of both the bar and the bench. And when I look at LSK, I see it as an intersection because there's not a single judge who's not a lawyer. Many lawyers end up being judges. So it's an intersection. You have the judge and the bench. This is LSK housing all of them. And my question as a non-lawyer is, how did we get to the point that the legal fraternity, and I was asking you earlier why it's a fraternity and not a sorority, but anyway, the legal fraternity is so hell-bent on not upholding rights for Kenyans?
Thank you, Gerald. A comment has come in from one of our senior advocates. Her name is Anna Konuche, and she says that this is thought-provoking and conscience-pricking discussion. So I'd like to just remind guests that they can send in their comments and questions in the chat section, or using the Q&A icon on the Zoom webinar. Thank you. So our next question is for Daisy. You've elaborated on the question and the issue of the selective application of the law in Kenya. Can you kindly share your views on the gendered dimension of this? You mentioned it a little bit, but more specifically, how it ties in with the 2/3 gender rule and how you think realizing that constitutional provision would actually give things a different look.
First of all, I think that the 2/3 gender principle was actually the thread that they used to begin the unraveling of the Constitution. And when I say the unraveling or let me say the constitutional order, there was a lot of pomp and ceremony and a lot of celebration when the Constitution of Kenya was promulgated, because it fundamentally altered the governance structure of our country and divided the powers of the presidency, to different institutions, different arms of government. But one central theme of the entire Constitution of Kenya is inclusivity of previously marginalized groups. So women, youth, persons with disability, and devolution is also part of the inclusivity in governance. However, so we have this government, the first government that is elected under the new constitution, which is the Jubilee government. And they come in and they seem like they mean to implement the constitution. However, the parliament, the 11th parliament that came in under the cover of the Supreme Court's advisory that allowed for parliament to sit without being declared unconstitutional because they would not meet the 2/3 gender principle. But they were given a timeline within which the mechanism for the implementation of the 2/3 would be put in place, and which was 5 years post promulgation, which was 2015, August 27, 2015. And the Supreme Court ruling in that manner, the majority opinion, actually set us back because it gave a justification for excluding the largest number, your highest number population. Women make up over half of our population. And for many people, they didn't see it as a constitutional issue. They saw it as a women's issue. So while we were out there fighting for the implementation of the 2/3, people said women want free things, but it's not a free thing. It's a guarantee in the Constitution, in as much as the guarantee of freedom of rights and expression and movement and all these things that people are advocating for today. The 2/3 gender principle and the requirement that we must have a minimum of a third of the opposite gender in every appointed and nominated position is a requirement of the Constitution. But because the majority of the people have a bias towards women, we have this socialization bias against women, despite the fact that we have very many overqualified women. It is still seen within that prism of why should women be in these spaces? And so we were fighting a lone battle. We have gotten court orders that have been disobeyed. And with Parliament, the legislative house at the national level, not meeting the 2/3, the president began the slide, because the next thing we saw was when he was to appoint his cabinet, when he reshuffled his cabinet, he dropped a few women, replaced them with men. We went to court, we got a court order requiring that cabinet must meet the threshold. The president was found to be in violation of the Constitution and the rule of law. However, this was not observed, and the slide continued. By the time we were coming to the 12th Parliament, we have a dissolution order for the current Parliament. We have a dissolution order. The Chief Justice has been petitioned to dissolve Parliament because a house that is not in itself compliant with the Constitution, how can a house that is not compliant with the Constitution make law? And this is where the legal fraternity comes in, because it is seen as not something that, it's not that much of a big deal. We come to Article 81 on the principles of the electoral process. The electoral process is required, among other things, aside from giving us a free, fair, and transparent and credible electoral outcome, they are also supposed to ensure that not more than 2/3 of elected members of public bodies are of the same gender and that we have disability representation. We do not meet that threshold yet. We keep going to elections and we say they are credible elections, so that the credibility of elections is not pegged to constitutional requirements. And that's where the slide began. And we kept on asking people, if it is okay for them to breach the 2/3 gender principle, which is in the Bill of Rights. That's the only reason that they've not been able to remove it. It's in the Bill of Rights, and to change the Bill of Rights, you need a referendum, okay? So if it is okay for them to not implement the 2/3, at what point will it be inconvenient for them to give us a transparent and credible election? We are seeing the inconvenience of it. But now, at what point do you start complaining? Because if it's okay for them to breach the 2/3, then it's okay for them to not give us a credible election. It's okay for the president to operate as though he is the law. It is okay for the parliament to violate the principles of the rule of law. Do you see what I mean? And that's why I say that the 2/3 gender principle, you know how they say that there's an African proverb that you do not measure the depth of the river with both feet. So the 1 foot that was measuring the depth of the river was the 2/3. And the pushback was only coming for women. And you see, in Kenya, there is actually no political cost to shortchanging women, because we have seen that even as the women have been shortchanged perpetually, they still continue to lend their support and vote for the same characters. They will sing and dance for them and they will mobilize for them, despite the fact it's like an abusive relationship. It's like a bad case of Stockholm syndrome, you know? So when you understand that, then you will understand where we have all failed, or where as a citizenry, we've all failed. Because the violation of my rights is the violation of your rights. So if it's okay for them to violate my rights, tomorrow they will come for you, you know? And that's where we're at. But we continue to give pushback, you know? And we hope that the LSK will take it up, because we have court orders that have not been obeyed. And even worse is that the state is appealing them. They are appealing the matter on the cabinet. They are appealing the matter on the parliament. So it's like the state basically coming to say that we shouldn't be forced to abide by the constitution. IBC was given a court order, the ORPP and IBC, that they must have an internal policy. Remember, they are independent. We know that the I in IBC stands for independent. We know that sometimes it may seem like it is silent. However, as an independent body, they have a responsibility to the Constitution, regardless of whether the legislature passes the necessary legislation or not. Why? Because the Constitution in Article 27(6) requires that the state should take legislative policy and other measures. So IBC can take other measures, ORPP can take other measures. As an independent body, they can take other measures to ensure that the 2/3 gender principle is met, and the court ruled so. So they were required that they must have an internal policy that allows them to reject political party lists that do not meet the 2/3 gender rule. The other day they declared they can't do it. But why? Because of political interference. How can an independent body declare that they cannot follow the Constitution? So this culture of impunity, who and why are they not able to? And these are the questions that we need to ask, and we must constantly give pushback.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We've got a couple comments from Mercy Wamboy. She says, truth be told, we need to have these bold conversations more often. There's a second compliment from Christine Jeru. She says, thank you, Daisy and Gerotich, for ably representing us. The reality at the moment is that the executive has gone rogue, and this is one of the dangerous things facing our rights and freedoms as citizens. What these women are doing is, what this means for women is even more disastrous. And it's a complete abrogation of the Constitution of 2010. We need to rise up and say enough is enough. Okay, so there's another question Daisy, if you don't mind, please can you talk about the current amendments to the special interest bill? Do you think that this might be a solution to having more women in parliament? And what are the alternatives?
That bill is actually for the implementation of Article 100. And that was the basis of the Supreme Court advisory of 2012. Article 100 requires that Parliament shall put in place the necessary legislation to allow for the participation of women, youth, persons with disability, and minority groups. It could help. However, the problem of the 2/3 is actually the problem of our politics, because the gateway to leadership and decision making, whichever level, whether it is at the executive level or the legislative level, is primarily through the gateway of the political party. For as long as the office of the registrar of political parties remains as weak as it is, please remember that from the time that office came into inception, the holder of the office has been in an acting capacity. You remember the former registrar, Lucy Ndungu, she operated in an acting capacity. And these are the cases that LSK should be taking up, the public interest litigation cases. Because why should we have a registrar operating for 7 years in an acting capacity or 5 years in an active capacity? The current one is also in an acting capacity and has been so, I think, since 4 years? I think since 2017, but in an acting capacity. So that tells you that there's been deliberate efforts to weaken the political party organizing. Weaken the office of the registrar of political parties that is responsible for monitoring and coordinating political parties and ensuring that they obey the law. It is poorly resourced. I don't think it is devolved. So it is a deliberate action on their part. So when you tell us that they are going to put in the legislation, what is stopping them now? Because one of the things that we must also go back to is this. In Kenya, we are fond of blaming the tools. We have very good laws in Kenya. We have an excellent constitution. Our constitution is prescriptive. It speaks to the matter. It is not ambiguous. It says in any elective or appointed body, you must have no more than 2/3 of the same gender. This is not confusing. The principles of the electoral process, you must ensure that in elective offices, you have not more than 2/3 of the same gender, meaning that within the Political Parties Act and the Elections Act, we should have mechanisms to enforce that, because they are the ones that animate the electoral process. So where is the problem? The problem lies in the political goodwill. Because if in areas, for instance, like appointments to cabinet, appointments to the diplomatic corps, appointments to civil service, if where there is no need for legislation, it's a numbers thing, we have 5 slots, 3 will go to women, 2 to men, or vice versa. If they can't do that, which law is going to make them do it? You see, so it's not about the law. We actually have very good law. So even this whole push of telling us that we need to amend the law to make things better, the problem is in what Cherotich talked about, the stinking impunity, that we have people who believe that the law does not apply to them and that they can do whatever they want without penalty, because we have penalties for laws. However, these penalties are not meted out, and that is how impunity thrives.
Thank you. So we have a message here from Helen Otolo. It says, congratulations to Cherotich for personally intervening to cushion Kenyans from the pandemic. My worry is the level of impunity of our leaders. They must be held accountable. I teach emotional intelligence at school, and my focus is on high self-awareness. My question is, are leaders aware of the impact of their actions when they flout regulations? This is going back to what we said earlier. If you could tie it into a recent article that was published in the Elephant Online website, in which you describe the COVID situation as the perfect storm. Can you tie it in how in a pandemic can we realize some of these questions and issues that we're facing?
Okay, thanks so much. But I just wanted, before I answer that question, the IBC issue for me is a key one, because if we do not confront the monster that is the IBC process, and the fact that IBC's setup jeopardizes our very democracy, because it is the entry point and access into our lives as Kenyans by foreign influences. They peddle influence. Eventually, whoever their candidate is, they back, they support. We saw the cheering squad in 2017. Eventually, you have a Manchurian candidate situation where whoever is in power, in fact, do you see the United States of America printing its ballots outside of the United States of America?
Or having their servers held
or
in
having
France
their servers held
are...
in France. So there's something there to be said. And the fact that we have a proliferation of members of the legal fraternity sitting, for example, right now working on the BBI or working on the referendum bill, people who are part of panels of experts who are sitting there figuring out how to rejig the IBC, knowing full well that whatever it is they're working on will not address the deeper rot within the IBC. So when you ask about leadership, is leadership aware? I also hold the legal fraternity responsible. And I know that as a Kenyan, under Article 3, in Article 3, I also have a duty to protect the Constitution. So as a Kenyan citizen, as a Wanjiko, as a Cherotich, I am duty bound to protect the Constitution of Kenya. However, over the years, we have understood that those who spend many years studying the law are in a good position to nuance, understand, protect. And what exactly has gone wrong? Whereas in the 80s and the 90s, where the champions of rights and rule of law came from this fraternity. Of course, there's always opposition, we know that, even within the ranks. What actually went wrong? And even when I look at conduct of members of the legal fraternity, look at the schedule of penalties for lawyers who engage in practice that's outside of conduct that is becoming. What happens to them when there's conflict of interest? How many lawyers would pass a lifestyle audit today? You know, so we as Kenyans have reached a point where we understand that not even this buffer between ourselves and this massive esoteric space called rule of law, this buffer doesn't exist anymore. It's like a tire running on flat, running on its rims. That's how we are suffering. But let me answer your question about the op-ed that I wrote, to answer the question that was asked earlier on. When I described COVID-19 as a perfect storm, I was basically saying that we have arrived at a point where the economy is tanking. It's been tanking for a long time. Experts have told us, because of the rampant corruption, conflict of interest, the same issues we've talked about in the energy space and all other spaces, that the country is falling apart economically. The underemployment, the unemployment, all of this wrapped up, not enough money for people even to buy their basics. And then you bring COVID, and there's a curfew, and there's a lockdown. It's a perfect storm because people are falling apart at the seams. They have no jobs, they have no money, they have no safety nets. They can't go to shags, as is the instinct when something like this happens. People who have reached out to Humanity Kenya have said, I was just about on my own in the city to see what to do so that I can send them some money. And the lockdown happened. So you have a perfect storm where people were not placed at the center of planning, emergency planning and response. Instead, what we have is a moribund, hapless, and arrogant, and unstrategic leadership. So they do not care. You treat a biomedical pandemic without looking at the socioeconomic impact. You have a recipe for disaster. And disaster is what people are currently experiencing right now. We have a country that has no social safety nets. Inua Jamii, hundreds of millions of shillings in arrears. And even when money is sent to the elderly people, it is stolen. You have syndicates and other people who are, and once you pass a certain age, I understand once you're over the age of 70, you're listed as having died, or you're not part of the system anymore, but money is being released. There's not a universal basic income. There is no cushioning for anybody anywhere. So when the government creates a cure that is more painful than the disease itself, you have a perfect storm. And people are impatient. I do not even understand. It's but by the grace of God that people have survived as they have survived by the skin of their teeth since the lockdown happened and since the curfews began. Whether it's a mama mboga who is struggling to eke a meager existence to go home. What about the mama fuas? You know, I ground myself in real examples. The other day, I don't know, I was going from point A to point B, and I found this was in the Kilimani, Kileleshwa Valley Arcade area. I saw no fewer than 5 intersections with no fewer than 100 women seated, waiting like this, with their masks, because of course you'll be clobbered by police. Unless you've gone to Atwoli's house, you'll be clobbered by police if you're seen without a mask. And I looked at them, and myself as a mother, I said, if I sat here from morning till evening, and this makes me angry, it makes me very emotional, morning till evening, and not a single job has come their way, and they do not have any money to take home, to buy, children are drinking sturungi, day in, day out. They leave them there all day. I said, these are the same electorate that people will come and throw 100 bob to and use ethnicity to whip up a frenzy and get them to vote for them and put these leaders back in power. And these women are going home hungry. This is how many days? 70 plus days, 80 days, 90 days. And this pandemic is far from over. So we have a government that does not care. We have a president who said last weekend that 300 million shillings a week, this is exclusive of the cash transfers to Inua Jamii, 300 million shillings a week, that is 1.2 billion shillings a month, are going out in cash transfers to people. Which people? Who are these people? There is such an impunity that even the billions of shillings pouring into the coffers of the government of Kenya for COVID response, yet we don't have enough PPEs out there. How many ventilators do we have in this country of ours? You have Siaya with I don't know how many ICU beds. And 3 months down the road is when the government is giving instructions to go and equip your county health facilities that we have raked in, not we, the government has raked in, but maybe we are the government. We have raked in hundreds of billions of shillings in loans. And this in the name of COVID response. And because we don't have an auditor general, that's another issue. 3 years down the road, oh, lakini, you know, the 1.2 billion, which was cash transfers, disappeared here, and we shall say, oh, this is terrible. And I come back to the legal fraternity and say, where are you? You guys know how the law is being manipulated to suit some cartels here and there. And you're waiting for Daisy and Cherotich as lay people to do the research endlessly and come out and shout. And when we shout, we're abused. Yet you have the full strength of the law and years of training and practice to come out and defend the Constitution of Kenya, whether it's public procurement, whether it's finance management, whether it is aspects of Chapter 6 that would make it impossible for certain people even to currently exist in office. No, you have stepped aside. When I say you, not you, Valentine, I'm talking about the fraternity. And people have stepped aside and abdicated. A very important violation also, I forgot, and I'll be remiss not to mention it, is a diaspora vote. It's a Supreme Court ruling. Yes. Permitting the diaspora to vote. But we're very happy for the remittances in the tens of billions of shillings, hundreds of billions over the years coming in from the diaspora to support to projects and this and that and remittances and so on and so forth. We're very happy to receive their monies, but we're not happy to enfranchise them. We don't want them to vote, maybe because those are guys who don't want to jinga and they cannot easily be manipulated where they are out there. Whether it's Australia, whether it's the United States of America, I think you can vote now in the East African community. Where else? South Africa? Where else can you vote if you're in the diaspora?
But surely, if you can use M-Pesa,
why can't you vote?
Why can't they vote from wherever they are?
So that is,
I mean, again, they want to make it difficult.
That is again impunity.
Yeah.
And even to end now my little diatribe here, I want to come back to your new president and the brave new bar. And I'm filled with hope. And yesterday, you know, social media was awash with responses when he said he's going to take the Attorney General and the Solicitor General to task, rightly so, and also see how to get Parliament to move a motion to impeach the president. Everybody says, oh, he is Icarus, he's overreaching, what's wrong with him? Because we have been taught to gaslight ourselves. We've been taught that disrespecting the law is normal. And so when president of the LSK says, we are going to do the following, everybody immediately sees it as a foregone conclusion that it will fail or that he has to be crazy. Actually, we need more crazy people.
Absolutely.
We need more people who are uncomfortable. If Nelson Harvey is crazy, then I'm happy to be crazy as well. And we want to lend our full support. And I'm very grateful that the LSK is even offering these types of fora. And the more public interest litigation we see, the more we see the LSK come down on rogue and errant advocates of the High Court, the more we see a purge, a removal of those who willfully violate the rule of law, the cleaner, leaner, and meaner your ranks will be, and the better able you will be to protect the Constitution of Kenya and to defend the rights and protect the rights of the people of Kenya.
And uphold the rule of
and
law.
uphold the rule of law.
And just to add on that, I think the Brave New Bar needs to award Okia Omtata.
Absolutely.
Because Okia Omtata
Absolutely.
held the place
Absolutely.
when LSK has not been fulfilling its mandate.
Do people think that Okia likes roaming around, running up and down to court?
He's been holding that space, and he's done it wonderfully so. Complaints from all over, but he has been brave. And I think that the LSK must recognize that his active citizenry for what he has done.
I mean, Comrade Okia Omtata is active citizen number one.
Number one, you know, and he needs an award from you guys. He needs that recognition.
Well, thank you. Definitely, it's a call to action by the Law Society of Kenya. We've heard your views and your shouting. We appreciate it.
Shouting, I haven't even started.
It's not a time. So we have two similar comments from Alan Muga and Maurice Kokeno regarding going back to the question of gender and women. They say that this is a very good discussion. Women are rising now in all spheres of development at the expense of men. Do you think that we should start looking at the question of empowering men? And Morris's question is slightly different. He says that, don't you think we should involve men more as part of our strategy? Okay. Or have they ever been excluded? It's for you to expound on that.
Okay.
By the way, have you seen, sorry, that means I was looking at my phone, that Governor Waiguru has been impeached? I'm just seeing the news here. That's just an aside, okay, which is linked to rule of law issues. But
she's been impeached, or a call for impeachment?
Governor Waiguru impeached. 23 MCAs vote to remove the embattled governor. Anyway, that's just so that we're completely current, but linked to people being tired and fed up. Sorry, Daisy. Thank you.
So let me say this. There's been a misunderstanding about the call for women's participation. It must not be seen as advocating for role reversal, okay? So when you say at the expense of men, there is that notion that what we are fighting for is role reversal, so that men, you come out and allow women to come in. And that is not what women's empowerment is about at all. It's about a shared space, okay? We're saying that we want to have equitable approaches to development, to discourses, to everything. And so we need both perspectives on the table. We need men and women on the table working together. Now, when you talk about involving men, in as far as men are the custodians of culture, yes, because we are socialized the same way. And majority of these elders are the ones who sit to decide, you know, how things will go. And they are usually men. Majority of them are men. And I think that even those spaces need to be opened up to allow for inclusion, you know, of different voices, because they're very narrow in their scope. I mean, you will not find any cultural practice that doesn't have a mechanism for the subjugation and exclusion of women at some point, you know. You're only allowed in when you're long in the tooth and you're not a threat. And I think that it's important that we have men who do not feel threatened by empowered women, who do not feel threatened by what is seen as strong women, because there's been this notion that women are the weaker sex, which is a complete misinterpretation of scripture, you know. It's a misinterpretation of scripture, because even when you read scripture, it says that when Yahweh was creating humanity, he created them male and female. So we are supposed to be equal. Men cannot exist without women, and women cannot exist without men. So we're not looking to create an Amazon. We're not creating a space for only women. We're quite happy to work with men, but not for them to direct us, to respect and understand that we have views that we can and we must share, you know, and they mustn't be afraid of that. And they mustn't feel that it's taking something away from them. When we're in school, don't we compete, both boys and girls, on equal footing? I mean, when we're little, I went to mixed school. If you in primary school, I went to a mixed school, you know, and there was no segregation between boys and girls. We studied the same subjects, we did the same tests, we ran the same races, we were twinned together. It is only when we went to high school that it was an all-girls school. And even there, we were taught to excel. There was nothing, there wasn't a notion of that you're a woman and therefore there are spaces that are closed for you. We were never taught that. I mean, and I suppose that is by, you know, a privilege that we had. I was confronted with discrimination on the basis of being a woman in my adult life. That's when I experienced it. I had never experienced it before, not at home, not in school, you know, and never taught that way. So I think that men need to build courage around women's inclusion, and then they need to become genuine champions, not like our champion for he, for she, because, you know, the president is the champion for he, for she, but he's not championing very well, you know. But we want men to really be champions, because you have men who have daughters, sisters. So what are you going to do? Are you going to educate your daughters so that they come to a certain point and they meet with this iron blockade that tells them you can go no further? We want a world where women excel. We are different, but that doesn't mean different. We're just different in looks and, you know, things like that, but not in our ability to be able to do things. The legal fraternity is awash with women. Some of the best lawyers are women, you know? So why would men be threatened with women's leadership? I mean, sometimes the king is the queen, you know?
I think that the private is always a reflection of the public and vice versa, and the personal is always a reflection or is linked to the political. So I think when we talk about this issue of gender and equality and so on, what one needs to do is just go back to people's homes and see what they do privately and see what they believe personally. And you will see it translated in the public and political spaces. That is why it is a very thin and artificial lip service to equality.
Absolutely.
So when you hear people talk about, yes, but women are, they're equal, go back and see how they behave at home. Men and women alike. I'm not just saying go see how the men behave, go see how the women behave at home. And until that conundrum is resolved, you will always have this space of diametric opposition, of hostility. When you talk about the girl child, they say, what about the boy child? There's not supposed to be that diametric opposition. I am a mother of only boys, 3 boys at that. And I am somebody who believes in the rights of all children, of the boy child, of the girl child. But I would never, to the exclusion of girls, try and favor boys and vice versa. When you try to redress a historical imbalance in an affirmative way, and maybe part of the problem is that we tend to use elite gazes and ape Western systems around equality and finding a space. We've not found our homegrown language, perhaps, in its entirety to articulate what equality means for us. And that's why sometimes I think that society is reacting and saying we have some ideas of equality and equity being rammed down our throats. When I was in university in the US, there was a big clash when you thought about Northern white feminists versus African women feminists, or African women's rights champions. When Alice Walker wrote novels, Possessing the Secret of Joy and so on and so forth, there was outrage because this is somebody from out there looking at us and telling us how we must manage our notions of femininity and being woman and our womanhood and so on and so forth. So I think, and there's been amazing African women feminists over the years who have trailblazed, whether it was women in theology or women in the arts or women in education. Women have championed, African women, championed the rights of African women in an indigenous and homegrown manner. And maybe we need to look more at that and see how that makes sense for us, because we end up being attacked and accused. If you go on social media, they say, you feminists, shut up. So I rarely say I'm a feminist. You rarely see me starting off by saying I'm a feminist, because I know that so many doors will have been slammed in my face, figuratively, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, before I have to say what I have to say. It's like if you're a Christian or a Muslim, do you spend a lot of time saying, I'm a Christian, let your works speak for themselves? Do you shout and say, I'm a Muslim? No, show your faith, show what you believe through your actions. So for me, as a woman who is pro-rights of every single human being, male and female, I show it in the way that I live my life and act and defend and protect. Even with Humanity Kenya, I've had as many, if not more, men reach out for assistance, because these are men who are the breadwinners, the sole breadwinners in their homes, and they suddenly were left with no jobs. They're emasculated. Emotionally, they are battered. They don't know what to do. They have a pregnant wife. They have 3 children. Many men have reached out to me and said, whatever you have. And for a man to reach out and say, nisaidie na kakitu kidogo, whatever you have, you know that they have reached a breaking point. And so I'm somebody who really respects and appreciates how men are also champions and protectors of their families. But that does not ever stop or take us away from the debate of inequality and those who profit from the structural injustice that keeps women in a place of inequality. So I think it's about more dialogue and engagement on these issues and obeying the law.
But I want to say something. I think there is a place for affirmative action, and it must be said, because take, for instance, the 47 seats that we have for women, which they are demonized completely. People talk about what do these women do? Why are they there? But let me tell you, there are parts of this country where if it was left to chance and dialogue, as you say, women would never be elected. If it wasn't for Article 177B, that requires that even if you will not elect them, they will be nominated to the county assemblies. We wouldn't have women in county assemblies. We've seen them get locked out of county assemblies, forbidden from holding leadership in the house leadership positions, in the committees. They are told they represent nobody. You and I know, among the Kalenjin, women are considered children. When they say Igat Lavo, they mean
or they ask who is home.
Yes.
They say, nobody, just
So women traditionally have been conditioned to believe that they are nobody. And they do it so unconsciously. Who is here? Nobody. It is just us.
So Daisy, who benefits from this? And that's why I was separating the.
You may have an elite group that may benefit. But however, by their presence there, they do something.
I agree.
While culture is busy raising a woman leader.
I agree.
So it has some value. Our challenge lies in controlling the space. Who gets in? And
I was going to say political parties and nomination lists.
Not just political parties. Our activism must have its expression in the politics.
Because if you end up having these women who end up, they were on the list because, the usual wives and girlfriends and so on and so forth, that is what undermines the sweat, blood, and tears that the women who have come before us have spilt. Wangari Maathai we were remembering her just the other day. How many liters of blood did she shed for us?
You know that her recognition came about only because she won the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yes.
She was never recognized.
Profits, and even the position when she was given assistant minister environment.
So it just tells you the contempt with which women are held.
I guess what I'm looking for is as we are pushing for that, and and we also look at what's happening on the ground on a daily basis, that a lot of the culprits are not those men who are struggling. Yes,
No.
they're not.
They're not.
And
Actually, they're not.
And I do not want to tar them with the same brush. But at the end of the day, they become beneficiaries of a system that prop and promote and favor men over women. And women, at the end of the day, however egalitarian they might be in their household spaces, become victims of a system that does not recognize their equality. So I think we are like two sides of the same coin, but again, not saying one over the other. But I just wanted to give a shout out to the good men. That's what I was trying to do.
Oh, there are so plenty of good men.
I don't need to give a shout out to the women because they're good. They're good. These women are.
No. We also have some very bad women.
And those bad ones
actually those bad ones are giving a bad name to women in leadership. Yes. Okay. And we must accept, because for me, one of the things I keep saying, we cannot say that we support women because they're women, because we're no better than the tribalists, because the only thing that you need is to be from this tribe.
We need good women.
We want also to have good women. But you see, because we don't control the space, the space is controlled by the same forces of impunity. And what do they bring? To stand up to it.
Because women are
at the end of the day,
and to abuse power.
Exactly. And women by and large are not crooked. I think they think about the consequences, However, we must find a way to hold the people in those spaces, because every woman who is in a leadership space right now, whether it is in cabinet or civil service or parliament, is there because of the activism of women over the years. And so it's a space for women, and they must answer to women. They don't answer to men. But the question for us, or the challenge for us, is how do we control as much as possible the kind of women that go into that space? Our activism must find political expression. It has to find political expression. So we have the right people doing the right thing, legislating, administering the state, and everything that comes with it, so that we justify our mantra over the years that more women translates to better lives for people.
And so long as women are not a political force, so long as women are the flower girls and the choir girls of patriarchal regimes and systems, we shall never, ever progress. So women
changing that.
We have to change that. The women of Kenya are changing that.
We are changing that.
Sorry, Valentine, are we ignoring you?
No. Yes, you have to be.
You better be one of them.
You can't be timid.
The 15 of us who signed the letter are not, it's not just 15. There's so many of us. And until women recognize their power as a political force, even as a voting, who was it you were telling me one day about how Charity Ngilu turned around a political space by getting women to vote.
In 2002.
In 2002.
In 2002,
women
she
are
actually, she was the only female in the summit. Remember, there was a summit for the NARC coalition, but she was working together with the women's movement at that time. And so when NARC won, the largest number of nomination seats were coming to the coalition, and she ring-fenced them for women. And she said these seats will go to women, and they already had a list of the women who would come in. KANU at that time, which was the one that had been unseated, remember? And KANU had released their list, which included, there were 4 men. So when NARC released their list, for the first time in Kenya, we had the highest number of female nominated members of parliament. KANU was so ashamed they withdrew their list. And when they represented their list, they had 2 men and 2 women. And that is how Dr. Esther Kaino and Ruth Angawa, Professor Ruth, not Angawa, Onyango, became nominated members of parliament. So you can see that influence, but it was women working behind the scenes, And Charity Ngilu herself is a product of the women's movement, and that whole group that came in.
My mother is also
the late Dr. Wanjiru Kihoro. Yes, is the one who actually organized for the women to come in. They had a fund. They were supporting women. And the highest number of women, the Martha Karuas. And
how can we forget Martha Karua, who is also your member,
and
who faithfully took Geshugo from where it was when she first became MP to where it is today.
She's been a brilliant.
We have come of age. We have come of age under these phenomenal
Yes, Dr.
women.
Yes. You
Oh,
know?
she's not a doctor, but I will tell her.
Oh. Where did I get that?
I will tell her you called her a doctor. Yes. Yeah, Phoebe Asio. Jael Mbogo.
Yes.
You know, there's so many fantastic women who have paved the way, and that's why we have to hold fast and push the gains forward. We can't be going back. And with the type of massacring we're seeing of the Constitution of Kenya,
efforts
efforts
because
to
the
massacre.
Constitution remains intact. They haven't managed to amend it. And this is where the caution is. Because remember that there are many ways of amending the Constitution.
And are they amending or changing? You know, there's also conflation there
they
sometimes.
Proposing to amend.
Proposing to amend, but there's a conflation sometimes because these proposals to amend sometimes look like a complete change or removal of certain aspects.
Yeah. Well, when you look at the areas where the Constitution can be amended only by referendum, now those are the key things that we should be looking out for. Because we have a tradition within the East African region, and don't forget that we are federated. We have a tradition in the East African Federation of leaders, when they come to term, amending their constitutions to remove term limits. Now, the term limits of the office of the president are one of the referendum issues. We also have seen the attempt at controlling the judiciary.
Yeah.
The independence of the judiciary is another referendum issue. We have seen ignorance of the participation of the people and the sovereignty. You see, the participation of the people is based on the sovereignty of the people. Because Kenya as a republic, the power belongs to the people. And they donate that power to the various offices and the individuals who hold those positions as a trust on behalf of the people. The sovereignty of the people is a referendum issue. Now, when you begin to see that, and you already see the practice that we are seeing, the judiciary being squeezed, the parliament essentially, you know, a marionette of the executive, and the executive not abiding by court orders and just basically doing as they please. The reality is, and some calls from he who throws parties, that the president is too young to retire. Then we can see where it is heading. And we must be vigilant. We can't wait and then say, oh, had we known. We know because they have told us.
But let me ask you, Daisy, how are we ever going to have a fair referendum with an IBC as is?
Yeah, but that's the question.
So how do we even begin to go there when we have an unreformed IEBC?
Well, we are glad.
It doesn't matter what we say.
The brave new bar. Because we take legal action against the violations of the rule of law, and we mount a very strong counter campaign. Really.
Why can't the brave new bar embroil the executive in litigation?
I think they plan to.
For the next 3,000 years until something's changed.
Mr. President should tell us.
Or are we waiting for Kio Mtata to also come and do this?
We'll join you.
We'll join you. And I was going to say, I felt so sorry for Chief Justice yesterday as he was, he had to bring it to the public to say, guys, this is not me. I'm trying to meet the head of state and he won't meet me. Why not enlist those who are sovereign? Sovereignty lies with us. Why not call upon the people of Kenya to join the judiciary, to march for its support, its independence? We have separated ourselves. We've been deliberately, civil society has been diffused to the extent that you don't know, it doesn't exist the way it did in the 90s and so on and so forth. So there's no place even for the judiciary to turn to and to say,
but it's been deliberate.
It's deliberate. So I say it's been a deliberate pogrom, if I put it that way. It's a pogrom of destruction of any potential for collaboration that would put pressure on those who would disobey and violate the rule of law for their own ends. And ultimately, for me, the referendum story, this is all about succession politics and ensuring the dominance of one family forever and ever and ever. Everybody else is just a pawn in the game, an expendable pawn. And if you go back, you will see that there's a certain group of people who detest the Constitution of Kenya 2010.
Oh, yes.
Because it usurped some of the executive capacities that existed.
But look at what they've gone on to do. They've weakened.
They've weakened the institutions.
They've weakened the independent institutions. I mean, which institution can we talk about right now? I remember in the run-up to the election, the Commission on the Administration of Justice released a list of people they deemed unfit to hold public office. They went on to be elected.
To run and to win.
And to run on a ticket by the governing party. The Ethics and Integrity Commission also sent a list to IBC and said these people should not
still run.
They should not be allowed. You
have trigger happy legislators still sitting there.
Parliament is seriously wrong.
You have those who are accused of murder.
Imagine.
People are still, that's at governor level, people are still in office.
What?
So it's true, show me one institution. And civil society was dissipated a long time ago.
Evil society,
and when
threats, I mean, like people being hit up with, because this is also the collaboration also with the judiciary. Remember, we did have a group of civil society that called to question the candidature of the two candidates, whether they were fit to run for those offices. The case was promptly thrown out because they said that, you are deemed innocent until proven guilty, setting a very bad precedent. And then look at the costs that they were hit up with. Punitive. Yet the law says that even when you have costs, they should not be punitive.
So let us not.
The court hits you up with costs of 200 million. So now what are you going to do?
I call it the disease of the dirty files. There's so many dirty files. It's a J. Edgar Hoover strategy where you have dirty files on legislators. You have dirty files on members of the judiciary, the legal fraternity. So many dirty files. At the minute somebody wants to do the right thing, they're told, we shall expose you. We shall send KRA after you. We shall disenfranchise you. We shall do everything. You look at it and you say, you know what? Let me just stay quietly where I am. So the judiciary has also been used as a big stick to hit Wanjiku over the years.
And don't forget that the state has brutalized its own people. There are people who have risen up. Trigger happy police have shot them. Extrajudicial killings. Today, till today, they're still Baby Pendo. Where is she? An innocent child.
This young man, Samuel Minor, was not killed, but I don't know if you saw the photos on social media. They had every intention to kill this man. There was a JKU a student who was caught up in demonstrations and watching the 4 police officers. One of them, I think, is a Rotich like me, stamping on his head, kicking him, the intention to kill. So the brutalization.
And people are terrified.
It's to terrify people into
from taking action.
So they don't take action. You take action, someone will come and pick you up in your house. So may the brave new bar protect citizens.
They're not protecting partners.
Yeah.
Because honestly, a state that brutalizes its people, when the people are simply demanding for accountability and their rights, should be exposed internationally as well. Yeah. They should be. I mean, really, we really need to start writing to international partners.
Because I think we're of the opinion that the head of state doesn't really care about what the people of Kenya think about
but he
it,
cares
but he cares what the international community thinks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yesterday, I saw the EU released another 7.8 billion towards COVID response. I said the minute we start alerting European member state taxpayers at national level to say, look at where your money is going. And these are your taxes. You're in the middle of COVID. You're also going to be struggling with your own economic recovery. And you're still throwing money willy-nilly. This is the peddling of foreign influence in our spaces. You give money and then your candidate of choice is propped up and so on. So we miss. And we
must also look at the China question.
Not want a strong democratic, and in fact, sometimes when Jubilee speaks, I wonder whether we're listening to the Chinese Communist Party.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. And
an action. I mean, we might as well be, as people say, a district, a province of China.
No, it is serious. And you know that the Chinese Communist Party frowns on civil society activities with Western tendencies. So we know where they're going with this. I mean, when people raise the hue and cry about the 239 passengers, it is the Chinese ambassador who released a statement telling Kenyans not to discriminate against his people. Who would do that? Like seriously, we have very, very serious issues of sovereignty. You know, the integrity of our sovereignty.
But our foreign affairs,
we still have it.
But Daisy, our
And
foreign
this is
affairs
where
was
we must bring
protecting,
Parliament.
foreign affairs was protecting the government of China
Even explaining
and
for
explaining for them.
Your friend.
We are being blasted, yeah, my nincompoop friend, that we're being blasted by the Chinese ambassador by protecting the Chinese who brutalize and mistreat our own citizens.
No, this is the other thing. I think the Brave New Bar needs to also establish the parameters of what citizenship entails. Because as Kenyans, I think there's so many people who do not know what a citizen is. I watched it was so heartbreaking to see that a woman, one of the evictees of Ruai, and she cried and she said, I am a victim of the clashes, you know, from the elections, the previous elections. She was evicted from Molo. She was brought to that place and she was told that this is the place they will be. When they were told that the land is in dispute, they were assured that they were going to be given another piece of land where they could settle. And then they have come at night and they have broken into my home. They've left me homeless. And she said, I don't know, if the government doesn't want me here, let them take me then to where I can live in peace. I thought that my government will protect me. I'm a Kenyan citizen. And you know, I listened and I ask often, do citizens actually know who they are and what they are entitled to? Because we are the ones who pay these people. We're taxpayers. Even if you're not paid a daily wage or a monthly wage, you pay, whether when you buy something, everybody pays tax.
So related to that, unfortunately, we're running out of time.
Yes, sorry.
But we will have a follow-up session if you're amenable. Just as a parting shot, we've received a comment from Stephen Mokaya, and he says that this is such an awesome discussion. How do we tailor such kinds of discussions for the rural or marginalized communities, and specifically women, in order to ensure that their voices are heard? You've echoed, but we focused on women in leadership. We focused on lawyers, the law society, the law sorority. What is your parting shot in terms of advice? If I could just give you both a couple minutes, please.
Okay. First of all, we work actually with rural women. You know, a lot of the time we are seen here in Nairobi. But when you talk about these women of Kenya, we actually have a network that goes right down to the grassroots. And so we share the message with them, the messages with them about what it means, what the Constitution has for them, what that change means, and how they need to be active citizens to defend their rights. We believe that the first thing about being an active citizen is to be aware. You cannot claim what you do not know you have, you know, and many people do not know their rights and entitlements. So one of the things that we do, we create awareness, civic awareness, and also political awareness. Now, a lot of women have been conditioned to believe that politics is the domain of men and you just leave it. But guess what? We remind them that these politicians actually decide how much you are going to buy your food. They decide how much levy you are going to pay. They decide on whether you will be able to have hospitals that have medicine, that have doctors, that they are going to decide whether you're going to have infrastructure. So politics is your business. So we get them into that political discourse to help them understand the link between politics and personal livelihoods. And it's very exciting when you see them open up. So we have our meetings, we have regular meetings. In fact, I know that we've been trying to bring them into the 21st century technologically, you know, because if you have WhatsApp, then, you know, we can have the online dialogues. Yes. So we do have conversations for the rural communities. However, I do think that we need to expand it more to be able to reach out to them and begin to have personal type conversations, okay? Personal type conversations where they're able to reflect on how everything that is happening at the national or county level affects them, because it's the only way that we will cause them to begin to demand for the right thing. And this is where the politicians defeat us, because they're there 24/7. They're in your funeral, they're in church, they're on your TV, they're in your radio. They have these platforms. And so they're constantly bombarded with the wrong message. And so the important thing is, how do we get that message to them as often as possible to counter
Repetition.
to counter the political narrative that comes from our politicians, because it is in their interest to balkanize them on things that are not really beneficial to them tribe. In fact, that's really the organizing factor. It's our turn.
Yeah.
So we are doing it, we are thinking around it, but we also welcome suggestions.
My work is more with Wakenya as a whole, as a group. But my work, for example, with the energy justice is not just to say, we say switch off KPLC because you understand that the direct source of your trouble, as you know it today, when you receive your bill or buy your tokens, is Kenya Power. But in the process of explaining what a bill means and explaining what is going wrong in the billing system, you unpack the energy sector. You talk about the injustice, the corruption. So it is about saying, yes, I understand. And by the way, go to your nearest place and say enough. No vendor cartels, no this, no that. But in the process, get people to understand the political economy behind this energy, in this energy space that is so contentious. If you control energy, you control the country. And so you have to go. It cannot just be education, awareness for the sake of it. It has to translate into political action. And to link to that, we would be remiss not to mention Black Lives Matter. Not so much in terms of getting into the specificities of what happened in the United States, because we know African Americans have been brutalized, extrajudicially executed for centuries, for decades and centuries before, in slavery and so on. What Black Lives Matter means for me is that no matter where we are as Black people, we have the organizing capacity. I remember staring with envy at the Hong Kong demonstrations that ran for months and months. I said, where will we find that ability to be so disciplined and to rise up and consistently speak against the powers that oppress us and discriminate against us? For us, we're not waiting for a white man to shoot us dead. We're waiting for a fellow Black police officer to clobber us to death or shoot us to death, or our Black political class to oppress us and rob us and steal us and rob us blind, and steal our children's future and mortgage our future. In the energy sector, we're mortgaged to the tune of about 6 trillion over the next 20 years. What are we saying about our grandchildren's ability to live peacefully and prosperously in Kenya? So for me, Black Lives Matter says, yes, Black Lives Matter, but can we see it and understand that there's a triggering opportunity, the perfect storm, as I say, at this point in time in the life of Kenya, to organize ourselves politically. So we do the education, the awareness raising, but also do the political work of collectively clamoring for change. If it's just Daisy, if it's just Cherotich, if it's a disparate group of people, we are a ragtag band and we're not threatened. But look at the demonstrations across cities in the United States of America, spread to different European cities. I mean, and we haven't demonstrated, maybe because we are so deeply inside our own troubles and problems that we say, hey, stand in queue, we're struggling to survive ourselves. But can we see it as an organizing, a seminal moment in the history of the world as we know it today? And we need to be able to seize that opportunity as well, to organize ourselves politically, to rise up, despite the fact that we are ravaged economically and socially by COVID right now, despite the fact that we have the rule of law being disrespected on a daily basis, despite the fact that impunity is as stench-filled as that Magari River, where the effluence flows into the underserved shanties, communities and the slums every time it rains. So we have to see it as an organizing moment, where whether you're a rural person, an urban poor, urban wealthy, middle class, that we can organize ourselves and stand up for our own rights as Kenyans. So it's something that will stay with me for a while, and I hope we don't lose this opportunity as Kenyans.
So thank you. Thank you. And saying thank you to Jero and saying thank you to Daisy.
Thank you.
We really appreciate you joining us today and your perspectives. The main objective of this social discourse is to broaden the repertoire of lawyers on these matters. And we've heard your perspectives, we've heard your recommendations, and your call to action, your challenge to the Law Society of Kenya, the Brave New Bar. And definitely, this is just the platform. There will be a follow-up from the Law Society. So thank you very much.
Thank
you.
you.
We wish
Thank
the
you,
best.
Valentine.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.